happened just months before. The morning sky hung gray and heavy over the city as rain poured down in sheets. The financial district buzzed with the usual Monday morning rush despite the weather. Men and women in expensive suits hurried along the sidewalks, briefcases held over their heads, desperate to reach the shelter of their office buildings. Among them was Richard Hayes. Though unlike the others, he wasn't battling the elements on foot. He sat comfortably behind the wheel of his sleek black sports car, a vehicle that cost more than what most people earned in 3 years. The interior smelled of rich leather and the fancy cologne he wore. The windshield wipers swept frantically back and forth as he checked his watch for the 5th time in 2 minutes. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. The meeting with potential investors was set to begin in less than 15 minutes, and he still needed to review his notes. Richard wasn't used to being late. In fact, he prided himself on his punctuality almost as much as he prided himself on his success. At 39, he had climbed the corporate ladder with remarkable speed, stepping on whoever necessary to reach the top. He pressed his foot harder on the gas pedal as he approached his office building, a towering structure of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the stormy sky. The rain hammered against his windshield, limiting his visibility, but Richard was too focused on the time to slow down. Just ahead, a small figure in a faded blue uniform emerged from the service entrance of his building. It was Elena Vasquez, a cleaning lady who had just finished her overnight shift. She was pulling her worn raincoat tighter around her body, preparing to brave the downpour for her long bus ride home. Elena was exhausted. She had spent the last 8 hours scrubbing floors, emptying trash cans, and cleaning bathrooms that would be dirty again by lunchtime. Her back ached, and her hands were raw despite the thin rubber gloves she wore. But she never complained. At 54, with 3 children depending on her, Elena considered herself lucky to have steady work, even if it meant sleeping only a few hours between her 2 jobs. As she stepped to the curb, she glanced both ways, squinting through the rain. The street looked clear enough for her to cross to the bus stop. She took a cautious step forward, unaware of the black sports car rapidly approaching. Richard saw the cleaning lady too late. His car hit a massive puddle at full speed, sending a wave of dirty water and mud up from the street. It crashed over Elena like a tsunami, drenching her from head to toe in an instant. The cold, filthy water soaked through her clothes and ran down her face in muddy streams. The splash was so dramatic that Richard actually flinched behind the wheel. For half a second, his foot hovered over the brake pedal. In his rearview mirror, he could see the small woman standing frozen in shock, dripping with muddy water, her already long day now infinitely worse. But the digital clock on his dashboard showed 8:47 a.m. The meeting was at 9 hour. Not my problem, he told himself, pressing the gas again instead of the brake. She should have been more careful. Without a second glance, Richard swung his car into the private parking garage beneath the building, the automated gate rising to welcome him as his keycard was detected. He pulled smoothly into his reserved parking space, the one closest to the elevator, with his name printed in bold letters on the wall. What Richard didn't notice was the unassuming gray sedan that had been idling across the street. Inside sat Vivian Chen, the notoriously private founder and CEO of Chen Global Investments. Few people knew what she looked like, as she rarely appeared in public and declined most photo opportunities. Vivian preferred to observe the world anonymously, believing it revealed people's true characters. Vivian had come to personally scout the location for a potential new headquarters. Her company was considering a massive investment in the area, which would include partnering with one of the local financial firms. Richard's company, Hayes and Lockwood Financial, was at the top of her list. But now Vivian sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, watching as the cleaning lady tried to wipe the mud from her face with an already soaked sleeve. The contrast was stark, the gleaming sports car disappearing into the exclusive garage while the worker stood abandoned in the rain. "Did you see that, Michael?" Vivian asked her driver, who nodded grimly. He didn't even slow down. "Would you like me to help her, Ms. Chen?" Michael asked, already reaching for his umbrella. "Yes, please do," Vivian replied, "and find out her name. Also, I'd like to know who was driving that car." As Michael stepped out into the rain to assist Elena, Vivian pulled out her phone and made a note to herself. She had built her fortune on being an excellent judge of character, and her instincts rarely led her astray. The brief scene she had just witnessed Told her more about Richard Hayes than any resume or business proposal ever could. Meanwhile, inside the building, Richard stepped out of the elevator onto the 30th floor, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He nodded at his assistant, who immediately jumped up to hand him a coffee and a folder of documents. "The conference room is ready, sir," the young man said nervously. "Everyone's waiting for you." "Good," Richard replied, not bothering to thank him. "Any word from Chen Global yet?" "Their CEO is supposed to be in town this week." "Nothing yet, sir. They're still playing it close to the chest about which firm they'll partner with." Richard smiled confidently. "Don't worry. Once they see my presentation, there won't be any competition. This deal is as good as done." He strode toward the conference room, entirely unaware that his chance at the biggest deal of his career had just been washed away in a puddle of muddy water. Outside, Elena finally reached the bus shelter where she tried to wring out her soaked uniform. The cold water had seeped into her bones and she shivered uncontrollably. The other people waiting for the bus edged away from her wet, muddy figure. "Excuse me, ma'am," came a gentle voice. Elena looked up to see a kind-faced man holding an umbrella over her. "My employer saw what happened and asked me to help. Please take this." He handed her a thick envelope. Inside was enough money to cover a taxi home, a gift card to a nearby department store for new clothes, and a business card with a phone number. "My employer would like to speak with you when you have time," the man explained. "There might be a better job opportunity for you." Elena stared at the card in disbelief. The simple logo read Chen Global Investments. Across town in a modest apartment, a phone rang. The caller ID showed Hazen Lockwood. "Financial." The man who answered was the head of the building's maintenance department. "I need information on one of your cleaning staff," said the voice on the other end. "A woman who was working the night shift that just ended. Small, probably Hispanic." "That would be Elena Vasquez," the supervisor replied. "Is there a problem?" "No problem at all," the caller said smoothly. "We just need some background for a special project. Could you send over her employee file? It's a confidential matter." The maintenance head hesitated. Something felt off about the request. "I'll need proper authorization for that. Maybe you could have Ms. Chen contact me directly?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What did you just say?" the voice finally asked, suddenly tense. "Who did you say would contact you?" "Ms. Chen, your assistant mentioned this was for Vivian Chen's review." Another lengthy silence followed. "Yes, of course," the voice finally continued, now noticeably shaken. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'll have the proper paperwork sent over." But the call ended without further explanation, leaving the maintenance head puzzled. Back in his office, Richard sat stunned at his desk, the phone still in his hand. He had only heard rumors about the elusive Vivian Chen, yet somehow her name had just come up connected to the cleaning lady he had drenched earlier that morning. A cold feeling of dread washed over him as he recalled the gray sedan he had barely noticed through the rain. Had that been? No, it couldn't be. That would be too much of a coincidence. But as Richard turned to look out his window at the rain-soaked city below, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, something that would change everything. And somewhere out there, someone powerful had been watching. Elena arrived home to her small apartment, still damp and shivering despite the taxi ride. Her oldest daughter, Lucia, was preparing breakfast for her younger siblings before school. When she saw her mother's condition, her eyes widened with concern. "Mom, what happened to you?" Elena waved away her daughter's worry with a tired smile. "Just a car in a puddle. Nothing serious." She didn't want to burden her children with her problems. They had enough to worry about with their studies. After changing into dry clothes, Elena sat at her small kitchen table and examined the business card again. Chen Global Investments. She had cleaned enough offices to recognize that this was a major company. Why would they be interested in her? Was this some kind of cruel joke? Her fingers hovered over her phone. The sensible part of her said to ignore it. Nothing good came from strange offers that seemed too lucky. But the practical side of her, the side that counted pennies and worried about next month's rent, urged her to at least call. "What's that, Mom?" Lucia asked, noticing the envelope and card. "I'm not sure," Elena replied honestly. "Maybe a job opportunity." Her daughter sat down across from her. "Is it better than cleaning offices all night?" Elena smiled. Almost anything would be. With her daughter watching, Elena found her courage. She dialed the number on the card. Across town in a luxurious hotel suite, Vivian Chen was already deep into her investigation. Her assistant, Michael, had compiled preliminary reports on both Richard Hayes and Elena Vasquez. Hayes is the senior vice president at Hayes & Lockwood, Michael explained, sliding a folder across the desk. The firm is seeking a partnership with us for the downtown development project. He's the one leading their pitch. Vivian nodded, scanning the information. And the woman? Elena Vasquez, age 54, immigrated from Guatemala 20 years ago, U.S. citizen, works 2 jobs, night cleaning at the financial district and afternoons at a local diner. 3 children, all in school. The oldest is in college on a partial scholarship. Any red flags? Criminal record? Bad debts? Michael shook his head. Nothing. She's never missed a day of work in 7 years, according to her supervisor. Sends money to her mother back home every month. Volunteers at her church's food pantry on Sundays, her only day off. Vivian leaned back in her chair, thinking. And Hayes? Michael's expression shifted slightly. On paper, he's impressive. Harvard Business School, rapid rise through the ranks, excellent track record with clients. He hesitated. But when I dug deeper, there are patterns. 4 complaints of taking credit for subordinates' work. 2 female employees transferred after filing unofficial complaints about his behavior. Nothing ever made it to HR officially. Of course not, Vivian murmured. Men like that are careful about leaving evidence. Her phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Michael checked the caller ID. It's her, Elena Vasquez. Vivian nodded, taking a moment to compose herself before answering. Ms. Vasquez? This is Vivian Chen. Thank you for calling. The conversation was brief but productive. Vivian explained that she was considering a new approach to staffing services for her company and would like to meet to discuss a potential opportunity. Elena, though clearly confused, agreed to meet that afternoon at a cafe near her home. Michael, clear my schedule, Vivian said after hanging up, and find out everything you can about Hayes & Lockwood's competitors. I want options. Meanwhile, Richard Hayes was growing increasingly anxious. His assistant had just informed him that Chen Global was requesting detailed information about the company's internal practices, including their service staff contracts and employee satisfaction reports. They want what? Richard snapped. Those are internal documents. Why would a potential investor care about our cleaning contracts? His assistant shrugged nervously. The email specifically mentioned it was at Ms. Chen's personal request. Richard paced his office, trying to make sense of it. He prided himself on reading people, on understanding what made them tick. But Vivian Chen remained a mystery. Few had met her in person, and those who had described her as brilliant but unpredictable in her business decisions. He pulled up the company's file on service contracts. Hayes & Lockwood, like most financial firms, outsourced their cleaning to the lowest bidder. Richard had personally pushed for cutting those costs further last quarter, earning himself a bonus for the savings. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Philip, the head of research, looking uncomfortable. Sorry to bother you, Richard, but I thought you should know. Chen Global just reached out to Westbrook Financial. Richard froze. Westbrook was their biggest competitor for the Chen partnership. Why? What did they want? They requested a meeting. Same time slot they canceled with us this morning. Richard sank into his chair. Something was very wrong. He needed to fix this, but he didn't even know what this was. Later that afternoon, Elena sat nervously in a quiet cafe, dressed in her best clothes, a simple blue dress she wore to church. When a sleek black car pulled up outside, she immediately recognized the kind man who had helped her that morning. Michael opened the door for a petite Asian woman in a simple but clearly expensive suit. Without the pomp one might expect from a wealthy CEO, Vivian Chen entered the cafe, spotted Elena, and walked directly to her table. Ms. Vasquez, thank you for meeting me, she said, extending her hand. I'm Vivian Chen. Elena stood awkwardly, shaking her hand. Thank you for the help this morning. It was very kind. Vivian smiled. Please sit. May I join you? For the next hour, Vivian asked Elena questions about her work, her experience, and her life. She listened intently as Elena described her daily routine, finishing her night shift, catching a few hours of sleep, then working at the diner until evening. And you've been doing this for how long? Vivian asked. 7 years at the office building. 5 at the diner, Elena replied. Since my husband passed away. Vivian nodded, making notes. Tell me, if you could change anything about how the cleaning services operate, what would it be? The question caught Elena off guard. No one had ever asked for her opinion before. Well, she began hesitantly, then found her voice. The schedules are impossible. We're understaffed, so we rush through everything. No time to do the job right. And the chemicals they give us, they're cheap and harsh. Bad for our hands, bad for the environment too. Vivian nodded, encouraging her to continue. Most of us work 2 or 3 jobs because the pay is so low. We're exhausted all the time. Tired people make mistakes, get hurt. But management doesn't see us as people, just expenses to cut. By the time their coffee cups were empty, Vivian had filled several pages with notes. Finally, she closed her notebook and looked directly at Elena. Ms. Vasquez, I believe you're exactly who I'm looking for. I'm creating a new division within Chen Global, Integrated Workplace Services. We'll be providing staffing for all our properties, starting with cleaning services. I want someone with real experience to develop and lead it. Elena stared at her in disbelief. Me? But I'm just a cleaner. I don't know anything about running a business. You know everything about what works and what doesn't. You understand the problems from the inside. That's far more valuable than an MBA with no practical experience. Vivian handed her a folder. This is my offer. Take it home, review it with your family. We can discuss details tomorrow. Stunned, Elena opened the folder and gasped at the salary figure, triple what she currently earned with benefits and regular hours. Why me? She finally asked. There must be thousands of people more qualified. Vivian's expression grew serious. This morning I watched a man in an expensive car splash you with mud and drive away without a second thought. In that moment I learned everything I needed to know about his character. Then I watched you, soaked and exhausted, help an elderly woman to the bus stop before thinking of yourself. That told me everything about yours. As Elena walked home, clutching the folder to her chest, she felt dizzy with possibility. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Across town, Richard Hayes was in full damage control mode. He had called every contact, pulled every string, trying to find out why Chen Global had suddenly gone cold. No one had answers. His phone rang, an unknown number. Mr. Hayes? This is Philip Turner from Westbrook Financial. Richard tensed. Why would a competitor be calling him directly? I thought you should know, Philip continued. Chen Global just asked us about our service staff contracts and working conditions. They specifically mentioned comparing our approach to Hayes and Lockwood's. Richard's blood ran cold. Did they say why? No. But the woman I spoke with, Ms. Chen herself, said something odd. She mentioned that character is revealed in how we treat those we believe cannot help or harm us. Does that mean anything to you? The phone nearly slipped from Richard's suddenly sweaty palm as his mind flashed back to the cleaning lady he had drenched that morning. Mr. Hayes? Are you still there? Yes, he managed to say, his mouth dry. Thank you for the information. After hanging up, Richard stood at his office window, staring down at the street 30 floors below. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds still loomed on the horizon. A storm was coming, one that no expensive car or corner office could protect him from. For the first time in years, Richard Hayes felt afraid. The presentation room at Hayes and Lockwood Financial buzzed with nervous energy. Richard had arrived an hour early, personally checking every detail of the setup. The projector, the handouts, the temperature of the room, everything had to be perfect. Today was his last chance to salvage the Chen Global deal. Water bottles on every seat? He asked his assistant, who nodded quickly. And the special folder for Ms. Chen? Right here, sir, the young man replied, holding up an expensive leather portfolio embossed with the Chen Global logo. Richard took it, running his fingers over the custom design that had cost a small fortune to rush order. Good. And the building maintenance head? He'll be here? He's waiting in your office, though he seems confused about why he's been called in. Richard straightened his tie. I'll speak with him now. Let me know the moment anyone from Chen Global arrives. In his office, Thomas Wilson, the head of building maintenance, stood awkwardly in his work uniform, clearly uncomfortable in the plush surroundings. Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming, Richard said, closing the door behind him. I understand you oversee all the cleaning staff in the building. Thomas nodded cautiously. Yes, sir. Is there a problem? Not at all, Richard assured him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm interested in one of your employees, Elena Vasquez. I understand she's been with you for several years. Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to wariness. 7 years. One of my best workers. Never late, never complains. Why do you ask? Richard leaned against his desk, aiming for casual interest. I'm considering a special recognition program for outstanding service staff. Ms. Vasquez's name came up. The maintenance head's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's unexpected. In the 10 years I've worked here, management has never shown interest in the cleaning staff before. Well, times change, Richard said smoothly. In fact, I'd like to meet her. Is she working tonight? Thomas shook his head. No, sir. She called yesterday to give notice. Said she's taken another position. Richard froze. Another position? Where? She didn't say specifically. Just mentioned it was a management role with better hours and pay. Thomas paused, studying Richard's face. Surprising opportunity for someone like her. Almost like someone important noticed her. The pointed look Thomas gave him made Richard wonder just how much the maintenance head knew. When is her last day? Richard asked, struggling to keep his voice even. Yesterday was. She's already gone. After Thomas left, Richard sat at his desk, mind racing. Elena Vasquez had vanished just as the Chen Global Partnership began to slip away. It couldn't be coincidence, his phone buzzed. They're here, his assistant said. But sir, it's not Ms. Chen, she sent her team instead. Richard's heart sank. Sending the team instead of coming personally was never a good sign. In the elevator heading to the presentation room, Richard struggled to regain his composure. He could still make this work. He was good at what he did, charming, persuasive, confident. If he couldn't win over Vivian Chen in person, he'd convince her team so thoroughly they'd have no choice but to recommend the partnership. The elevator doors opened, and Richard plastered on his most winning smile. Across town, in a modest office building far from the gleaming skyscrapers of the financial district, Elena Vasquez sat in a small but bright conference room. Spread across the table were floor plans, staff schedules, and supply catalogs. Beside her, Vivian Chen reviewed a proposal for their new Integrated Workplace Services division. These eco-friendly cleaning products cost 30% more, Vivian noted, pointing to a line in the budget. Elena nodded confidently. Yes, but they last longer, work better, and don't make the staff sick. The extra cost pays for itself in reduced sick days and better results. And this schedule? 4 6-hour shifts instead of 2 12-hour ones? People work better when they're not exhausted, Elena explained. And we can employ more workers this way. People who can't manage 12-hour shifts because of family obligations or health issues. Vivian made notes, impressed by Elena's practical wisdom. What about training? Elena's eyes lit up. That's the most important part. Most companies give new cleaners a mop and 10 minutes of instruction. I want a real training program. Proper techniques, safety procedures, how to use equipment correctly. It saves money in the long run, Vivian smiled. In just 3 days, Elena had developed a comprehensive plan that addressed everything wrong with conventional cleaning services. She brought knowledge no business school graduate could possess, the lived experience of someone who had done the work herself. I think we're ready to present this to the board next week, Vivian said, gathering the papers. Are you nervous? Elena laughed softly. Terrified. But you know what scares me more? Going back to working nights, missing my children's lives, feeling invisible. Vivian squeezed her hand. You were never invisible, Elena. Some people just choose not to see. Back at Hayes and Lockwood, Richard's presentation was not going well. The Chen Global team asked pointed questions about employee retention, community engagement, and ethical practices, areas Richard had considered mere formalities in the original proposal. Our commitment to the community is fundamental to our business model, he assured them, falling back on corporate jargon. Can you provide specific examples? Asked a sharp-eyed woman on the team. Richard fumbled through vague mentions of charity golf tournaments and holiday food drives. And your service staff contracts? Asked another team member. We understand you recently negotiated them down to cut costs. Richard's collar felt suddenly tight. We optimize all expenses to maximize shareholder value, even at the expense of living wages for your lowest paid workers? The questioning continued for an uncomfortable hour. When it finally ended, Richard knew he had failed. The Chen Global team gathered their materials without the enthusiastic handshakes that typically followed his presentations. As they filed out, the last team member handed Richard a business card. Ms. Chen asked me to give you this. She's launching a new initiative you might find educational. Richard looked down at the card. Integrated Workplace Services, Elena Vasquez. Director. His blood ran cold as the final piece clicked into place. That evening, Richard sat alone in his large, empty house, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. His phone had been buzzing all afternoon. The board wanted explanations, his boss demanded answers. The Chen Global Partnership would have made his career. Now it might break it. He opened his laptop and searched for Elena Vasquez Chen Global. A press release appeared, dated that morning. Chen Global Investments announces new integrated workplace services division, focusing on ethical employment practices and property maintenance. The division will be headed by Elena Vasquez, bringing 12 years of frontline experience to the executive role. There was a photo. The cleaning lady he had splashed with his car, now in business attire, standing proudly beside Vivian Chen. Richard closed the laptop, the reality of his situation sinking in. In ignoring someone he'd deemed unimportant, he'd sabotaged his own future. His phone rang again, his boss. Richard stared at it, knowing the conversation would be unpleasant. As he reached to answer, a new email notification appeared on his screen from an unknown address. The subject line read simply, "Regarding the incident on Monday morning." With shaking fingers, Richard opened it to find a single line of text and an attachment. "Mr. Hayes, I thought you might be interested in this security footage." V. Chen, the attachment was a video file. Richard clicked play and watched in horror as a high-definition security camera showed his car speeding through the puddle, drenching Elena. The camera angle then shifted to show a familiar gray sedan parked nearby, and a clear shot of Vivian Chen watching the entire incident. The video ended with a still frame of Richard checking his watch in his car, clearly visible through his windshield. Making no move to stop or apologize, Richard closed the email, feeling sick. Vivian Chen hadn't just witnessed his moment of callousness, she had evidence. And while she hadn't shared it beyond this warning, the message was clear. She could if she chose to. His phone continued to ring as Richard sat motionless, contemplating how quickly a life could change. One moment of revealing his true character had cost him everything he'd worked for. Across the city, Elena tucked her children into bed for the first time in years. Tomorrow she would start her new job at normal hours. She would be home for dinner, help with homework, see her children off to school in the mornings. As she turned out the lights, her oldest daughter asked, "Mom, are you really going to be a director? Will people listen to you?" Elena smiled in the darkness. "Yes," she said, surprised at the confidence in her own voice. "Because I have something important to say." 3 months passed quickly. Autumn leaves gave way to winter frost, and the financial district sparkled with holiday decorations. Inside Hayes and Lockwood Financial, the mood was considerably less festive. Richard sat in a conference room much smaller than his previous one, surrounded by stern-faced board members. His once perfect appearance had slipped, his tie slightly crooked, dark circles under his eyes, a button missing from his suit jacket that he hadn't noticed. "The numbers speak for themselves," said Gregory, the CFO, pointing to a graph displaying a sharp downward trend. "Since losing the Chen Global Partnership, we've missed 3 major opportunities. Investors are nervous." "It wasn't just Chen Global," added Patricia from legal. After they walked away, Turner and Associates and Westbrook Financial followed. "It's like we've been blacklisted." All eyes turned to Richard, who struggled to maintain his composure. The past 3 months had been a nightmare. His star had fallen as quickly as it had risen. The board had already stripped him of his corner office and most of his responsibilities. This meeting felt like the final nail in his coffin. "I've been reaching out to my contacts," Richard said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "I have promising leads with—" "Richard," interrupted Harold, the board chairman. "We've decided to restructure the leadership team. Effective immediately, you'll be transitioning to a regional sales position in our Cleveland office." The room fell silent. Cleveland. Not even a major financial hub. It might as well have been Siberia. "This is absurd," Richard protested, heat rising in his face. "One lost deal and you're demoting me? After everything I've brought to this company?" Harold's expression remained unmoved. "This isn't about one deal. It's about a pattern of behavior that's become a liability. We've received concerning reports about your treatment of support staff." taking credit for others' work and general conduct unbecoming of leadership. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. Someone had been talking. His mind raced through possibilities, disgruntled assistants, jealous colleagues, or, is this about the cleaning lady? He blurted out. Because if Chen Global is spreading stories, no one mentioned any cleaning lady, Harold said, his eyebrows rising. But your reaction is telling. Richard realized his mistake too late. He had exposed himself. The Cleveland position starts next month, Harold continued. I suggest you use the time to reflect on what kind of professional you want to be going forward. This meeting is adjourned. As the board members filed out, Richard remained frozen in his seat, staring at the empty chairs around him. His phone buzzed with a text from his now ex-girlfriend, canceling their dinner plans permanently. Even his personal life was unraveling. Across town in a gleaming new office building, Elena Vasquez led a very different kind of meeting. 20 people sat around a large table, men and women of various ages and backgrounds, all wearing the navy blue uniforms of Chen Global's Integrated Workplace Services Division. The first phase rollout exceeded expectations, Elena explained, pointing to a presentation slide. Client satisfaction is up 87%, and staff retention has improved from 60% to 95%. She clicked to the next slide showing before and after photos of cleaning staff. The before images showed exhausted workers with poor equipment. The after shots displayed the same people looking energetic, using modern tools, and wearing ergonomic gear. Most importantly, Elena continued, not a single workplace injury this quarter, compared to 12 in the previous system. At the back of the room, Vivian Chen smiled proudly. Her gamble on Elena had paid off beyond her expectations. Not only had Elena created an efficient, ethical workplace model, but she'd also become a powerful spokesperson for industry reform. 3 major corporations had already approached Chen Global about implementing similar systems. Next month, we begin Phase 2, Elena announced. Training programs for career advancement. Cleaning staff who show potential can train for maintenance, technical support, or management positions. A hand rose from the table. Won't that create staff shortages if our best cleaners move up? Elena smiled. That's exactly the point. We want movement, growth. The old model treated cleaning jobs as dead ends. Our model sees them as starting points. After the meeting, Vivian joined Elena in her office, a modest space with family photos and a window view of the city. The board was impressed, Vivian said. They've approved the expansion budget. You'll be hiring 30 more staff next quarter. Elena looked momentarily overwhelmed. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life now. 6 months ago, I was invisible to people like... She trailed off, but Vivian knew she was thinking of Richard Hayes. Have you heard anything about him? Elena asked, her voice carefully neutral. Vivian considered the question. He's being transferred to a smaller office. A significant step down. Elena nodded slowly. I don't wish him ill. I just hope he learns something. That's why I chose you, Vivian said softly. Anyone can spot talent or intelligence, but recognizing goodness, that's rare. Later that evening, Richard stood in his half-packed apartment, surrounded by boxes. Most of his furniture would be sold. His new salary couldn't support his lifestyle. The Cleveland apartment he'd leased online was less than half the size of his current place. His doorbell rang. Probably another buyer for the furniture he'd listed online. He opened the door to find Thomas Wilson, the maintenance head from his office building. Mr. Wilson? Richard said, confused. What are you doing here? Thomas held up a small box. Found this while cleaning out your old office. Thought it might be important? Richard took the box, still puzzled. You could have left this with reception. Could have, Thomas agreed, making no move to leave. Heard you're headed to Cleveland. Richard's jaw tightened. His humiliation was apparently common knowledge even among the maintenance staff. Yes. A lateral move. He lied. Thomas nodded, clearly not believing him. Life's funny, isn't it? How things turn around. Did you come here just to gloat? Richard snapped. No, sir. I came to tell you something. That morning, when you splashed Elena, I was having a smoke by the service entrance. Saw the whole thing. Thomas paused. Also saw you check your mirror. You knew what you did. Richard felt his face grow hot. It was raining. I was late. It was just a puddle. Just a puddle to you. But Elena had to work her second job soaking wet all day. Caught a bad cold, too. Thomas shook his head. Small things to one person can be big things to another. Why are you telling me this now? Richard demanded. Because everyone deserves a chance to do better. Cleveland could be a fresh start. No one there knows you as the guy too important to care about a cleaning lady. With that, Thomas turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing in his doorway, the small box still in his hands. Back inside, Richard opened the box to find a few personal items from his desk, a university paperweight, a fountain pen, and a framed photo of himself accepting an award last year. He barely recognized the smug, self-satisfied man in the image. He sat heavily on a packing box, turning the frame in his hands. His phone rang, his mother calling for their weekly check-in. He'd been avoiding telling her about Cleveland. "Hi, Mom," he answered, trying to sound normal. "Richard, I just saw the most amazing story on the news. A former cleaning woman who became an executive at Chen Global. They're calling her program revolutionary." Richard's stomach twisted. "Really?" he managed. "Yes." She was talking about dignity in work, how every job deserves respect. "Made me think of your father, 30 years driving that delivery truck and how people looked right through him. This woman gets it, his father." Richard hadn't thought about him in months. Dad had worked hard his entire life, often coming home exhausted, hands rough from labor. Richard had been determined to live differently, to be the one giving orders, not taking them. Somewhere along the way, that determination had twisted into something ugly. "Richard, are you still there?" "Yes, Mom, sorry, packing is distracting." "About that," she said carefully. "I know Cleveland wasn't your choice, but maybe it's not all bad. Your cousin David lives there, remember? Says it's a good place to raise a family." Family. Another thing Richard had put off in his climb to the top. After saying goodbye, Richard walked to his window, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow the movers would come. His sleek sports car was already sold, another casualty of his reduced circumstances. Yet as he stood there, an unexpected feeling crept in beneath the anger and humiliation. Relief. The constant performance, the networking, the politics, it had been exhausting. In Cleveland, nobody would expect him to be the Richard Hayes of Hayes and Lockwood. He could just be Richard. He picked up the photo again, then deliberately placed it face down in a box marked "Donate." Whatever came next, he didn't want to be that man anymore. 1 year later, the Cleveland winter had finally given way to spring. Richard Hayes walked through a modest office building, nodding to colleagues as he passed. His expensive suits had been replaced with business casual attire, his designer watch swapped for something simple and functional. The regional sales office of Hayes and Lockwood occupied the entire 4th floor of the building, nothing like the gleaming skyscraper he'd worked in before, but comfortable enough. Richard stopped at the break room to pour himself a cup of coffee. A year ago, he would have sent an assistant to fetch it. Now he not only got his own coffee, but often brought an extra cup for Linda, the department secretary who'd been with the company for 23 years and knew more about their operations than anyone. "Morning. Richard," said Carl, one of the sales representatives. "How's the Henderson account coming along?" "Progress," Richard replied with a small smile. "They're cautious, but I think we'll get there. Progress." The word had taken on new meaning for Richard over the past year. Progress wasn't always about big wins and dramatic deals. Sometimes it was small steps building something sustainable. His demotion to Cleveland had initially felt like exile, punishment for losing the Chen Global partnership. The first month had been brutal. His new colleagues knew his reputation, and most kept their distance. His small apartment felt claustrophobic after his spacious downtown condo. The winter was harsher than he was used to, the city less glamorous. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things had changed. Without the pressure of executive meetings and power lunches, Richard found himself with something he hadn't had in years. Time to think. Time to remember who he'd wanted to be before ambition had consumed him. He'd reconnected with his cousin David and his family. Started helping coach his nephew's Little League team. Joined a community garden. Small things that would have seemed inconsequential to his former self, but now formed the structure of a life that felt increasingly genuine. At work, he'd discovered something unexpected. He was actually good at sales when he took the time to listen to clients rather than bulldozing them with charm and pressure. His numbers weren't spectacular, but they were solid and growing steadily. Back in his office, Richard checked his calendar. He had a lunch meeting with a potential client, followed by a video call with the main office at 3. That was the one he was dreading. Every quarter, each regional office reported directly to the executive team in New York. Last quarter, Harold, the board chairman, had led the call. This time, according to the meeting invite, they would be reporting to a special projects team from Chen Global Investments, which had become Hayes and Lockwood's majority shareholder 6 months ago. Richard had managed to avoid any direct contact with Chen Global since his transfer. He'd heard rumors, of course. Chen Global's integrated workplace services had expanded rapidly, becoming an industry standard. Elena Vasquez had been profiled in business magazines, and Vivian Chen had continued her pattern of unexpected business decisions, including the surprising move to acquire a controlling stake in Hayes and Lockwood. At precisely 3 o'clock, Richard joined his colleagues in the conference room. The Cleveland office manager, Denise, would lead the presentation, with each department head providing updates on their areas. As the sales manager, Richard would go last. The video call connected, and Richard felt his heart stop for a moment. There on the screen was Vivian Chen herself, seated beside Elena Vasquez. "Good afternoon, Cleveland team," Vivian said pleasantly. "Thank you for joining us today. I'm Vivian Chen, and this is Elena Vasquez, who leads our Integrated Workplace Services Division and our Corporate Ethics Committee." Richard fought the urge to shrink in his chair. Did they know he would be on this call? Were they here specifically because of him? He glanced around, but his colleagues seemed relaxed, unaware of the history between him and the women on screen. The presentation proceeded normally. Each department reported their quarterly results, answered questions, and received feedback. Finally, it was Richard's turn. "Sales has seen modest growth this quarter," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "We've focused on building long-term client relationships rather than pursuing quick wins." He shared his screen to show the sales graphs, walking through the numbers methodically. When he finished, he braced himself for questions, or worse, recognition. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," Vivian said, her expression unreadable. "Your approach to client relationships aligns well with our new company values. I'm particularly interested in your customer retention figures." Richard blinked in surprise. She was treating him like any other manager. "Thank you. We found that listening to client needs, even the small ones, builds trust that translates to loyalty." Elena nodded. "That philosophy applies across all relationships, doesn't it? Professional and personal." There it was, a subtle acknowledgement of their history. But to Richard's surprise, there was no accusation in her tone, just a genuine question. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "I've found that to be true." After the call ended, Richard's colleagues filtered out of the conference room, chatting about weekend plans. Richard remained seated, processing what had just happened. They had seen him, recognized him, but offered no public humiliation, no pointed remarks about his fall from grace. He was gathering his notes when his phone rang. A New York number. "Richard Hayes," he answered cautiously. "Mr. Hayes, this is Vivian Chen's assistant. Ms. Chen would like to speak with you privately. Are you available for a video call in 5 minutes?" Richard's mouth went dry. "Yes, of course." Alone in the conference room, Richard straightened his tie and smoothed his hair, old habits that surfaced with his anxiety. When the call connected, Vivian Chen appeared on screen, now alone. "Mr. Hayes," she said with a slight nod. "Thank you for taking my call." "Ms. Chen," Richard replied. "I admit I'm surprised to hear from you." "I imagine so." She studied him for a moment. "I've been following your progress in Cleveland." Of course she had. Richard felt a flash of the old resentment but pushed it down. "May I ask why?" "Professional curiosity," she replied. "When a person experiences a significant setback, it reveals character. Some become bitter. Others learn and grow." Richard didn't know how to respond to such directness. "Your regional manager speaks highly of your work this past year," Vivian continued. "She says you've become one of her most reliable team members, collaborative, respectful to everyone, regardless of position." "I've tried to be," Richard said carefully. "Elena saw your quarterly reports as well," Vivian added. "She was impressed by your client retention strategies." Richard couldn't hide his surprise. "She was?" Vivian nodded. "Elena doesn't hold grudges, Mr. Hayes, neither do I. We're more interested in growth, personal and professional." She leaned forward slightly. We're implementing a new corporate structure at Hayes and Lockwood. As part of that, we're creating a leadership ethics division that will work alongside integrated workplace services. We need someone who understands both corporate culture and the importance of how we treat people at every level. Richard stared at her in disbelief. Are you offering me a position? I'm suggesting you might be qualified to interview for one, Vivian corrected. Your experience on both sides of the power dynamic gives you a unique perspective. If you're interested, Elena would conduct the first interview next week. After the call ended, Richard sat motionless in the empty conference room. Through the window, he could see people in the park across the street enjoying the spring sunshine. A year ago, he wouldn't have noticed them at all. His phone buzzed with a text from his cousin, reminding him about his nephew's baseball game that evening. Richard smiled, then noticed an email arriving from Elena Vasquez with the subject line, "Interview details, Leadership Ethics Division." He opened it to find a professional, courteous message outlining the position and scheduling options. At the end was a personal note. Richard, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. I look forward to our conversation. Elena. Richard thought back to that rainy morning a year ago, when he'd splashed mud on a cleaning lady and driven away without a second thought. How could he have known that moment would change the course of his life? How could he have imagined that the woman he dismissed as invisible would become someone he admired, someone who now offered him a path to redemption? As he typed his reply accepting the interview, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: genuine hope. Not the shallow satisfaction of climbing over others to reach the top, but the deeper fulfillment of becoming someone worthy of respect. That evening, as he cheered for his nephew from the baseball stands, surrounded by his cousin's family, Richard's phone buzzed with a calendar invitation. The interview with Elena was confirmed for the following Tuesday. Everything okay? His cousin asked, noticing Richard's thoughtful expression. Yes, Richard said, smiling as he put his phone away. Just a chance to make things right. Across the country, in her office overlooking the city, Vivian Chen reviewed the quarterly reports from all Hayes and Lockwood branches. Elena Vasquez sat across from her, adding notes to an interview plan. Are you sure about this? Vivian asked. Bringing him back into the fold? Elena looked up from her work. You taught me that true leadership isn't about power. It's about seeing potential in unexpected places. Vivian smiled. And do you see potential in Richard Hayes? I see someone who's learning what I've always known, Elena replied. That every person deserves dignity. That how we treat others when we think no one important is watching reveals who we truly are. She closed her notebook and stood to leave. Besides, the man who splashed me with mud that day wouldn't recognize the lesson. The man I'm interviewing next week already has. As Elena left the office, Vivian turned to the window, watching the city below. From her height, the people on the streets looked tiny, but she knew each one had a story, dreams, value. Her success had come from never forgetting that, and from recognizing character when she saw it. Whether in a cleaning lady with wisdom beyond her education, or in a fallen executive learning humility. The evening sun cast long shadows across the city, reminding her of something her father once told her. It's not about never falling down, it's about how you rise again afterward.